You're listening to the ADHD Support Talk Radio podcast. ADHD Support Talk is brought to you by addclasses.com. Visit www.addclasses.com and sign up for free webinars and online events today. Hello, and welcome back to ADHD Support Talk Radio. I'm your co-host, Lynne Edris, and I am a productivity coach and co-host here, and I help overwhelmed professionals from all over the world learn to reduce procrastination, take control of their time, and get more done with less effort so that they have more time, more energy, and even more money for what matters most to them. I am a woman with ADHD myself, so you guys know I have been where so many of you are, and I've come out the other side, so to speak. I always say ADHD doesn't go away, but you absolutely can learn to live well with it. So I've gone from living in that constant state of chaos and overwhelm and underperformance that we all know far too well to living a life of more success and fulfillment than I once dreamed possible. And I know you guys can share the same success yourselves. You can learn more about me and what I do at my website, which is www.coachingadvantages.com. And if you'd like to join my next live online productivity workshop, you can simply text the keyword productivity to the number 33777 to find out about the next free event. Well, today I have with me Rick Webster, and in a moment, Rick and I are going to talk about a really important topic for our tribe, and it's a really common struggle for adults with ADHD, and that is finance, financial literacy, financial management. So welcome to the podcast, Rick. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here.
Tell the listeners a little bit about you, introduce yourself, and, we'll jump in.
Sure. Well, I'm Rick Webster. Have a little company called Rena-Fi, Renaissance Financial, essentially. And we teach financial literacy. And unlike 85% of the financial literacy programs out there that fail to effectuate the change that they purport to make by teaching the mechanical aspects, we teach behavioral finance. It's not so much can you add and subtract? We could all do that in sixth grade. We could all balance a checkbook in sixth grade. The problem is behavioral. And so we approach that aspect of it. And of course, we talked about budgeting and all that, but it needs to come after. The why we do things comes before the how are we going to do them. The question, I put forth a lot of times is, why do you have a $1,200 payment for a Range Rover in your checkbook when you don't own a house yet? What was inside of you that drove you to need that validation, or whatever reason you bought that particular fairly expensive car before you buy a house?
Right,
so
absolutely.
We talk about those kind of things. So that's Rena-Fi, Rena-Fi.com. As background, I guess, I've been with CHAD, which is an ADHD organization, for the last 20 years or so. I'm on their national board, and I'm the chapter coordinator for San Francisco Bay Area in California. I've also been working a lot with ADA lately. That's pretty exciting. They're a whole different kind of group, but they're a sister organization in a way. So that's really exciting. They do a lot more things that are online and such. And they're a perfect match for us, because people with ADHD, it's an unfortunate statistics, but according to Russell Barkley, the general population, 15% of us have severe financial difficulties at any given time. People with ADHD are 61% have severe financial problems. And severe has a definition. It basically means you're losing something. You've lost your job, or you're, something's being repossessed, or you've got an eviction notice. That's a pretty tough burden to bear for 61% of the people who have ADHD. And it's unnecessary. It's just completely unnecessary, and it's kind of tragic in that it happens. So that's really the reason our company exists, is to defray and dissolve that problem so people can live the life that they want.
And that's huge. It's such a common struggle for my clients, and it shows up differently among different adults, of course. Some of us really struggle to, control impulse spending. Some of us may not struggle as much with impulse spending, or we may struggle with it. I always think of some of my clients struggle with impulse spending, but it's not the big ticket items, but it can be an accumulation of lots of small ticket items. There can be some organizational challenges that get in the way of our, money management in terms of paying our bills on time, getting, organized, keeping our systems, staying on top of our systems, that sort of thing. There are so many different things that come into play when it comes to someone being financially stable. Mm-hmm. It's a big, I often say it's like a tangled web, right, that we have to untangle. And every single individual is going to see, face these kinds of challenges a little bit differently.
Mhm.
What are some of the things that you see most commonly, kind of ADHD characteristics or the most common kinds of challenges you see in the adult ADHD population when it comes to their financial health?
One of the biggest is and hardest ones to remediate, I think, is employment. The people with ADHD, they have a hard time climbing the corporate ladder, or if they think they're really good at making widgets, they think they can go into business for themselves because they don't like their boss or for whatever reason. So they go into the business of making widgets and suddenly realize making widgets was just a very small part of actually doing a business. So then they have troubles there. And people with ADHD frequently, they just kind of bounce along the bottom they have a hard time climbing ladders, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for people to learn how to do.
Absolutely.
Another problem, I think, which is part of ADHD, is we have a hard time thinking in terms of incremental progress. We want it all right now. And if it's not all right now, I'm going to go do something else. And that didn't work. And I didn't get all that right now. So I'm going to do something else. And pretty soon we started 18 different projects, really haven't made traction on any of them to speak of. So that's a difficult thing for people with ADHD, is to, I believe, learn that they can climb that ladder. They don't have a faith a lot of times because they've been so damaged in some way or put down and take over a period of time that they really don't have faith in themselves to be able to climb that ladder. That's a big part of what we do at Rena-Fi is to give people back that kind of faith.
That's huge, right? I mean, most of us have, I call it experiential proof, right? We've got years and years or decades and decades of things that we call a failure. And I would agree 100%, Rick, we don't focus on that incremental improvement that we need to focus on to see that we're getting better at something, especially something that's long-term, right? Like money management, financial health, whatever you want to call it, it's the longest of the long games, right? And you have to learn to see the progress, to value the progress, even the effort that you're putting forth. If you're saving for retirement or saving for a home or saving a down payment on an apartment, whatever you're saving for, that it's a long game, right? It's a long-term sort of project that we need to start to look at a little bit differently. And that's tough for a lot of us with ADHD.
It absolutely is. The way I envision it, it's a set of habits embedded into routines. Mm-hmm. And if you can do that, then you have a much better chance of being able to climb this ladder, of being able to work your way toward the future. And, I'm going to give you a metaphor that I use a lot in my own life and for other people. It's a little bit like climbing a 10-story building by the stairs. If you, there's this idea of the secret that's out there, which is really kind of damaging to a lot of people. They think, well, if I just think about where I want to get to, if I want to think about my goal enough, if I just think about it every day when I get up, I'll get there, as if it was magic. And unfortunately, that just doesn't happen that way. The world doesn't work that way. But if you have a vision, the top of this 10-story building is where you want to get to in your life, at least in that goal. If you can imagine the 10 stories worth of steps that go up, and if you can wake up every morning and work on 1 or 2 or 3 of those steps, the ones that are right in front of you, incremental progress, you will get to the roof, right? You won't get to the roof if you wake up and dream about the roof. You'll get to it if you make a plan and you stick with it. And it's not only that, but if you dream about the roof every day, it's demoralizing because every day you're not there. Every day you have to go to sleep saying, I didn't get there today. And I'm not any closer than I would have been, if I did anything else. So it's demoralizing. But if you've got this plan with 10 stories worth of steps and you take 3 of them, and that's what you decided the morning, that morning that you were going to do, you feel good about it. Hey, I took 3 steps. I can see the next 2 or 3 in front of me for tomorrow. I'm going to take those. You begin to build faith in yourself that you can climb these steps.
Absolutely. I often say that our ADHD tribe tends to focus on the gap, right? We tend to focus on the big space between where we are now and where we want to be. Mm-hmm. We're not really good at focusing on the fact that that gap is getting smaller, that we're making progress in closing the gap. So we tend not to give ourselves credit. It's, you and I talked about it a couple of minutes ago, that, now and not now kind of way of thinking. But if we can learn to focus on our progress, set smaller milestones for ourselves, it's a big shift for a lot of our clients, but we have to learn how to do it. As with any sort of long-term project or long-term objective that you want to achieve, that incremental view, that, kind of shorter milestones or whatever you want to call them that you're moving toward, seeing the progress, seeing the gap close, you've got to be able to start to shift the way you're looking at those things and approaching those things so that you can actually make some progress. Nobody saved for retirement in a week. I mean, maybe if you hit the lottery, but I think, that I don't know anybody that's ever actually hit the lottery in any significant enough way that, they could save for retirement in a week.
It's interesting you bring that up, because those kind of things, they're actually damaging to people. Winning the lottery is probably one of the worst things that could happen to you. I mean, the big lottery. Mm-hmm. People, when they win the lottery, they look at them 5 years later, they don't have any money, they don't have any friends, a whole lot of things have fallen apart in their lives, and they're demoralized. It's very much like NFL players. They have a very short career, they make a lot of money, it seems to go away, and their friends either have their hand out, or if they won't give them any money, their friends get mad, that kind of thing. So it's a big problem. You're actually better served. Who was the lady? The lady that swam from Cuba to Florida. But she talked about it's not so much the destination as it is the journey. And I know that's cliche, but the fact is it's this journey that we're taking, that's the core of life right there. It's not just suddenly being there and not having a foundation under you to manage being there. If you just found yourself on the top of the 10-story roof that we're talking about, you'd probably fall off somehow, right? Because you didn't earn it, so to speak. You didn't mold your own mind into that process of building that.
Right. You didn't make the changes you needed to make along the way to be able to manage being on the 10-story. I would love to wake up tomorrow with a winning lottery ticket. I'd love to try that out. But Rick, you're exactly right. I mean, I think we've all seen the statistics on lottery winners, big lottery winners. They tend not to hang on to it. They tend not to, know how to manage it well. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not really serving them well. Again, I'd love to try it. I'd love to experience that myself. And I'm sure lots of our listeners would. But if you really need to kind of do the work and make the changes in perspective and the way you think about money and the way you think about managing money and the way you think about your ability to manage money, right? So a lot of my clients, by the time they get to me, I work with adults exclusively. So there's sometimes decades of, what they consider, poor money management. They'll say things like, I don't know how to manage money, or I'm horrible with money, or whatever. Those are all behaviors that you can learn, but you've got to learn to make that shift in the way you're looking at yourself too, or you are always going to be somebody who doesn't know how to manage money.
I believe along those lines, you become your self-talk. So if you're telling yourself you're horrible with money, guess what? You're going to be horrible with money, because you can't think one way and be another. You just can't do it. And again, I wish I could remember her name, the same woman who swam from Cuba to Florida. She didn't say it was necessarily about the journey. She said it's about what you become and who you become in the struggle to achieve something.
Right.
And I think that's just profound.
It is. It's a change in who you are, and the piece I always talk about that I call the between the ears piece. The way you're thinking about it, the way you're looking at it, the way you're thinking about and looking at yourself and your circumstances and, kind of your relationship with money. It's a tricky one. And money is one that's tough for a lot of people as well. So what else would you want our listeners to know about, what's important about learning how to manage your money? It's a big question.
Start with that. What's important about it is the future is coming, whether we want to put our head in the sand or not, it is coming. And so if you don't want to retire broke, if you don't want some of these really draconian kind of situations to come up, you need to start fairly soon. Wherever you're at, you start wherever you're at. We have a retirement program coming up to talk about for people between 45 and 65. You can start planning for retirement at 65 if that's your age at this point. Better to start at 45. There's another cliche out there that says the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is right now, right? So people should start figuring this out now. Right. In terms of I want to stay too theoretical here. In terms of something very practical for people, a lot of people will say, well, if you've read The Richest Man in Babylon, it says save 10% of your income, which is a really great general concept. It won't do it for you, but it's a great general concept. A lot of people will say, I can't save 10% of my income. I'll get evicted. I'm already spending 105% of what I make. My credit cards are building up, this and that. So we don't advise people to just save some arbitrary amount of what they're earning, but you do need to, as your income increases, keep a lid on your expenses. And over a period of time, that gap will widen. And that's where your stability is. If you're making $5,000 a month and you're spending $4,000, you've got $1,000 cushion there. If you're making $5,000 and you're spending $3,000, you got twice as much of a cushion. And so if you were to lose your job, you go backwards at that rate, $3,000 or $4,000, and it takes a long time to make it up. We talk about climbing ladders. Right. When you fall off the ladder, you go down faster and it hurts, right? You end up having to start over and climb again. So it's really important to build stability into your life, into your financial life. We equate it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like I said, we're behavioral, type education. Maslow's it's basically the second level of that pyramid. It's if you don't have that stabilized, you're not going to be able to have a good relationship. It's not going to last. You're not going to be emotionally available for your kids. You're not going to be able to build some great thing that you've got in your head that would be wonderful for the world. You won't be able to do it if you're constantly worried about being evicted or trying to struggle to make your car payments or working 3 jobs just to make ends meet. It's really, really important. And I think people should realize that, not to scare them, but so they're mindful about it, so they understand what's happening. And then I'll go back to that example. If you're making 5 and spending 5, you can't save 10%. But when you get a raise of $250 a month, you can probably take half of that and put it aside and live on the rest, because cost of living, and you don't want to live a life of deprivation. So you'll take some of that to live on. Over the years, your income will outstrip your expenses that way. And at some point, you may be living on 30 or 40% of what you make instead of 95%. And then you're very much more stable. And then you can have the life that you want. We're not about teaching people how to become wealthy. That's fine. And we have some interesting courses on that. But it's really about getting financial stability so that you can live the next 3 levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah. That stability it's not sexy and it's not exciting in the moment, but like, boy, can it change your life, right? You don't have to worry about where your next rent payment or mortgage payment is coming from. When you don't have to worry about whether or not you can afford the groceries that are in your cart. I mean, that is freeing. It opens you up for everything else, right? To be present with your family, to be present with your friends, to do the things that, are meaningful to you, the things that really matter to you. So it really is, these are all behaviors that people can learn. It really is something that's foundational to you being your best self. And that's not something that most of us really, I think about together. We often think about those things as being independent of one another, but it's really hard to be your best you when you're worrying about, whether you're going to have enough money to put gas in your car to get to work next month.
Absolutely. And, you touch on another point. People don't talk about money, right? There's a lot of shame. They think there's character attached to it, who knows, but they don't talk about it. And if I was to see a line of 100 people with ADHD, myself included, if there was a line of 100 of those people and I talked to every one of them, probably 2 or 3 or 5 of them would say, yeah, I have financial difficulties and whatever. Most of them would be dressed nice. They would talk like everything was okay. They just don't, they're ashamed of how they are. And what I think can really alleviate a lot of that is to realize that out of that line of 161 of those people on average have severe financial problems. So you're not alone in it.
Absolutely.
And that's the first step of realizing there's really no shame. This is not a character issue. It's a money problem, right? So the next step is to realize that you can do something about it, and it's not rocket science. It really, you definitely can do it. And while I agree it's not sexy, I think one way it might help people is to think back to something that was really difficult and impending. Maybe you had an eviction notice and whatever, and you took care of it somehow. Just remember how good it felt when you dealt with that and when it was off your shoulder. If you didn't get it fixed correctly, the problem comes around again, which is a problem for ADHD people. But if you can remember how that felt, that might give you the horsepower to go out and say, you know what? This is not my life. This is my life over here. I'm going to change it. We're not victims. We have control of these things.
We do, much more so, I think, than we think we do sometimes, or much more so than we believe we do sometimes. And you don't have to turn it around, you don't have to turn it 180 degrees all at once. Most of us can't do that. Incremental changes that Rick's talking about can make a huge difference. If you, really create that, I can't think of what you called it, that margin or that cushion between, what you're making and what your expenses are. And you really start to grow that sort of buffer zone. Mm-hmm. That's where your freedom comes from, whether it's your retirement, whether it's, something you want to do different with your career or your life, or something you want to do for your family or for yourself, for your friends or your charity or your community, or something that you care about. That's where the freedom is. Mm-hmm. Most of us aren't really motivated, I don't think, by little rectangles of money with, presidents' faces on them, or, that in and of itself isn't the thing that's motivating. I think for most of my clients, when we really tap into what whether it's financial freedom or, whatever it is that they're trying to create around money, managing their money better in, whatever way that client is working on, when we can tie that to what really matters to them, that's where we start to really give it some juice. And that's where it actually becomes kind of sexy, right? That's where the energy and the emotion come from.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I went through a fairly severe financial meltdown probably about 22 years ago or so. And it was pretty serious, but when I started rebuilding, I had these kind of global parameters in my head of what I wanted. And one of them, I think, as you started to say, I realized I never want to work just for a paycheck again. That is so hollow. And it was always hollow, but it was even worse when I lost everything, right? It was like, well, what did I do all that for? Yeah. So I do believe that there's a lot of different ways to make a living in this world. And it's really important to find one that you feel good about. You'll get paid, right? If you have something that's valuable to the world, you obviously have set boundaries. You can't work for free. You have to say, well, no, I need a raise here because my work's valuable. You have to set boundaries. But if you're really good at what you do and it's valuable to the world, you'll get paid for it. That's just kind of how it works. Not one-to-one all the time. It's not perfect. But in general, the more valuable you are, the more you have basically to sell in the world, and you will make more money. So that's pretty much it. I wanted to give another practical tip. Let's go back to the $5,000 income.
Absolutely.
Let's just imagine that you're in a position where you're making $5,000 and you're spending $4,000, and you're probably not saving much, right? If you can just pay yourself first, this is another old thing, but if you can pay yourself, say $500 of that, 10% of it, and then you spend your $4,000, and now you've got $500 left over for discretionary, because if you live a life of deprivation, you'll fail, right? And then when you get that raise, every time you get a raise, save some fairly large percentage of it, pay yourself first, put that off into a retirement account. Mm-hmm. At some point, those monies that you're putting aside will be generating their own income. We call it Financial Freedom Day, when that money you've set aside is now returning from those investments enough money that you can pay your $4,000 worth of expenses or whatever it happens to be.
Right.
And it's slow, but even though you're not at the 10th, on the roof yet, even when you're in the second and third story, you can say, well, geez, my investments now, they're giving me like $700 a month. I didn't have that before. That's right. Passive income. If I lose my job or something, I have that to fall back on a little bit.
Absolutely.
So yeah, small moves. You mentioned that. Small moves, much better than winning the lottery. Small moves where you grow at the same time as your money does.
Oh, I like that. Where you grow at the same time as your money does. I like that a lot. I like the notion of paying yourself first. It's hard, right? But even a little tiny bit can make a big difference. When I'm 54, so I'm going back a long, long way. When I was first working, 1 years old, when I got my first, whatever you want to call a real job, didn't pay very much. Really not a whole lot of room between the bills and what was coming in, but I put just $10 a week away I had it automatically transferred into another account. And that was where things like Christmas, things like, present gifts, things like, trips, vacations, that was my discretionary fund. Yep. $10 a week wasn't a lot, but it was hard to do. But over time, it builds, right? Over time, it builds. And as your salary goes up, as Rick was saying, as your income goes up, and if you can cap your expenses to whatever degree you can, you can build that even more. Little bits at a time can make a really big difference. It's hard to see in the beginning, $5, $10 a week, whatever it is, really in just a few weeks starts to add up. It doesn't look like big money, but imagine that at the end of the year. Yes. I mean, that it can really grow. So, I'm talking little numbers, but that's basically how I learned to save, is I had it come out of my paycheck before I even saw it. I had that was transferred before anything else was taken. If I really needed to access that money, I could, if I had a car emergency or something, came up, it was there. But that was how I learned to save, but I had to do it really slowly and let it build. That's those little steps that Rick's talking about eventually lead you to the 10th floor.
And I think that putting $10 a week isn't going to get you to retirement if that's all you do, but right. It's the habit. It's the small moves, building the habit. And then as your income goes up, you say, oh, I could put 50 away now, right. Or 75 away, and you let that grow. And then it's also compounding, this is your money grows exponentially That doesn't mean it doubles every 2 days or anything, right? But it means it's being multiplied by 1.1, 1.2, whatever it happens to be. It's being multiplied over time as opposed to being in addition to. When you put aside your 120 during that, well, you said a week, right? So your $520, you set that aside. At the end, you had a little bit more than 520 because there was some return on that money that probably got reinvested as well. Well, the next year you could put the same amount aside, but your extra return would be a lot more because it's returning not just on the money you're saving that year, but the money you had saved the year before, plus the interest that you had gained the year before as well. So our brains don't work exponentially. We don't think that way, although we need to learn how to do that better. But that is really what's going on. There's compound interest, there's you earning more money and then putting more money aside. There's a lot of different factors at play here, and they turn into a multiplier effect on that money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Any last thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners, Rick? Important points, anything, you want to share? And then again, tell us how, people can learn more about Rena-Fi, what you do, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I guess the one that's been recurring to me while we've been talking is this idea of procrastination, putting things off. And it's almost a hallmark of ADHD. We just do that. I don't know why I do it myself. It's very difficult to break through that. I think procrastination, for someone who doesn't have ADHD and is kind of ill-informed, they think it's a character issue, this person's lazy or whatever happens to be. And unfortunately, we internalize those judgments. And pretty soon we're saying it to ourselves, even when no one else is saying that. It's important to break through that and realize that procrastination is probably most often caused by overwhelm. People get overwhelmed and they just don't think they can do it. And they just kind of, the water level rises and they just say, I can't deal with this. And they end up kind of starting to drown a little bit until they clear things out. And then that's that roller coaster that people with ADHD do. So I think the real thing here, that the same example of planting the tree, now is the best time. You didn't do it 20 years ago. Now is the best time. It's really important that people with ADHD, everybody really, take these steps to begin building their financial future right now. They can be really small steps. It's not the size of the step that counts. It's the fact that you took one. And you build confidence in yourself. The next day you take 2 or 3, and you build more confidence in yourself. And pretty soon, you look in the mirror and you can say, you know what? I'm a person who gets things done. And you can honestly say that to yourself. And when you can say that, you become much more powerful. And you can actually say, yeah, these 3 things are really important. I'll do them tomorrow. And you feel very confident that you will actually do them tomorrow. Yes. So I think it's really important that people have a certain faith in themselves that they can do it. And that develops over time.
It does, with small successes and giving yourself credit for those small successes. Absolutely. Every step you take toward that 10th floor counts. And you've got to give yourself credit for every step you take toward that metaphorical 10th floor, and every day of your life and every step you take within that. I think that's absolutely beautiful. That's a great note to end on, Rick. Thank you so much for joining us. I know this is helpful to our listeners. If you want to learn more, we've got Rick's website. Tell us again, Rick, what it is, Rena-Fi.
Yeah, we're at Rena-Fi.com. That's RENA-FI. If you get it wrong, we bought a bunch of the URLs. So if you misspell it, we probably get to us anyway.
I do the same thing, right? Okay, great. And and of course, on the podcast webpage on iTunes, that information will be there as well. So it's RENA-FI.com. Thanks so much, Rick, for being here, for joining us. Thank you all for listening. As always, we appreciate your attention, and we'll catch you next time.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Rick. Take care.
Bye. Bye-bye.